understanding that you are helping organizations do things much quicker, and inherently, like the first time I saw what you guys do, it like clicked. Like it wasn't like I didn't need someone to describe it to me. I was like, oh, good Lord, this is exactly what people need. But thinking through that, what is the kind of thing that keeps you up at night? Like what is stressing you out from a job standpoint that you're actively working to address?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I guess from a job, I was going to say from a non-job standpoint, it's the NBA playoffs.
We can talk about that after if you would like.
Up at night. And my Hawks are unfortunately out of the race, but you're the Cavs still look like they have some fight. But on the job side, I really think it's less kind of fear or stress. It's more excitement in kind of determining where you want to spend sort of cycles in effort on, right? And so going back to that mind shift thing, the thing that's really exciting to me is that, coming out of the teardown process and like the fact that, as you just mentioned, our software can do a lot of, can eat into the workflow layer and kind of do actions on behalf of teams, both like Copilot or Autopilot. I think the really interesting paradigm shift is that companies are now starting to evaluate like software and technology and headcount costs in the same pool rather than in disparate pools. And so in the past, right, like if you only had a $200,000 tech budget, a $50,000, $20,000 purchase is going to be heavily scrutinized, right? But if now technology has the ability to kind of produce crazy efficiency gains, like, with Orum, you can 5x the number of dials you were able to do before, right? And you can now kind of do with this fewer number of people the same work output of multiple folks. The paradigm shift is now such that it's just about what are the total number of kind of costs that you have and what are the pipeline goals you have to drive. And it's less of like, okay, well, we can only allocate this much here and this much there. And so I think that paradigm shift is actually really exciting. But then kind of the question that you ask is, okay, well, with all of this shift in sort of dynamism going on, how do you fit in alongside that picture? And the big challenge that we always are kind of thinking about is, well, what problem do Orum and Actively help solve? We help increase mostly outbound, right? Pipeline generation, drive that more consistently and increase that. But that's an evergreen challenge, right? Because there's so many different ways that you could tackle it. You guys are tackling it one way, we're tackling it in a complementary way, but there's also all these other ways that you can go at that, whether it's investing in third-party signals, making your models better, automation, you name it. And so I think that's the big question, which is where do you spend kind of additional time when you have an evergreen sort of challenge that you're working on solving? And it really comes back to what we talked about earlier, which is staying really close to the customer and the users and doing that kind of business mapping to understand, what are the problems today and how are they going to evolve when, your technology inevitably makes an effect, right? Or the dynamics of the market change. And so that's the big one for me. I'm sure it's probably a similar one for
it's really interesting. So because of the first episode, I can kind of expound a little bit on my own background because people won't have known it yet. I've been in content marketing for 15 years, and one of my first CEOs came from a PR standpoint, and he would always talk to me when we were building on a piece of content. You talk about triage. He'd be like, "Yeah, it's like I'm doing, for people who are listening to the podcast, I'm making like the reverse triangle." And he's always like, the very top of the funnel, give me the most important information, and then like narrow it down because realistically people are going to stop paying attention. And in theory, that works. It's triage, understanding what's most important to people. But to kind of what you're saying, and like the same thing, it's true, I think, in like any aspect of the role. Like for me, creating content for Orum, I'm one of the only people who do that. So in theory, I'm like, okay, let's focus on the most important things. But the most important things change so quickly in this space. And it's like the old Fight Club thing, like if everyone is special, no one is. It's like if everything's the most important thing, what is actually? So for you, how are you guys thinking about triaging, like what is the most important thing you can tackle? You mentioned business mapping with organizations, but like how do you in a day in and day out basis address like, okay, this is the actual most important thing that I need to be spending my time on?
It's a good question. I don't necessarily think we do the best job. And we have a blessing and curse of basically having what I would, humbly say is a pretty OP engineering team. So we can basically build anything, save for maybe AGI. We probably need some more dollars and more more resources to build that out. But I think it's definitely a challenge. Our approach has been partner up with companies that are living in the future, right? Companies that are growing, the fastest growing companies that want to grow even faster, but not in the scenario of just throwing a bunch of dollars and humans at the problem, but in terms of being, if they need to do that, they will do it, right? But being really smart, efficient, and targeted about it. And that's kind of the big paradigm that like we've seen, taking inspiration from other kind of iconic B2B companies is work with customers or prospects, clients that are living in the future and figure out like ultimately what their viewpoint is, how that aligns with yours, how you can shape it. And then the rest of the market will follow. As you know, there's like the classic innovation adoption curve. And so companies like Ramp that we're working with, like Verkada that we're working with, they're of course, trying to optimize a unit of their SDRs times or their AEs times as much as they can. But then they're also investing at the same time in like automated outbound or tools or software or technologies that can kind of really operate in headless fashions at scale. And so because they have the blessing of, doing hundreds of millions of revenue and they have a lot of resources, they can invest in those kinds of approaches. And so how do you bring that to the broader market? And so that's there's no like, okay, this problem is like the one that, or this specific aspect of that, of the 40 hours a week is what we want to, automate. We want to be pretty kind of broadly open-minded, but just really making sure that we're spending as much time as possible with these companies that are living in the future.
I think the way that you would address that makes so much sense because you're right. It's people, organizations are realizing now that doubling your pipeline, doubling your revenue doesn't just mean double the people that you have. It's understanding what are the ways to automate the things that are taking forever and optimize the ability of your sales reps well. And I think the absolute best organizations that are doing this aren't just like optimizing their sales reps' capabilities, because I think what people a lot of time think about is, I can 5x the productivity of our top producers. That's great. But they don't think about like, are the tools I'm giving them going to also lead to burnout? Are they going to like exhaust them? Which is why I love what you guys do. And I'm so proud of what we do here at Orum, because when people initially see like, I was making 50 calls and now I'm making 300 calls in a day, that's exhausting. That's so many conversations. It's like, no, watch how it works. Understand that it's also giving you time back, which is the thing that I also love about Actively is it's all about taking all of the things you're doing and just making it more efficient and much smarter. So that wasn't even a question. That was more of me kind of giving you your flowers. So that